Captain Midnight.
Last month, I announced the first issue of my new comic book, Binary C, in my face reveal video. Check it out if you haven't seen it yet, but the short version is that the crowdfunding campaign is live on Zoop right now. Digital editions of the issues are only $2. We have a great variant cover and some other cool perks. You can find that link down in the description, and for all those who have supported Binary C, I want to say a huge thank you. The response has been incredible, and I can't wait until you can read it, which at this point is actually very, very soon. So I've got a video on Invincible Season 2 in the works, but before that, I wanted to take a few minutes to answer some questions I've gotten about the creation of Binary C and how it all came together. I honestly don't know how many will be interested, but I did have quite a few people reach out and ask how they could start the process of making a comic. So hopefully this will be helpful to a few people out there and maybe shed some light on my own creative process as well. And if you'll indulge me, I'm actually going to go way back, like before I even started Captain Midnight. See, I've always loved comics, but before Binary C and even before this channel, a lot of what I was working on were screenplays and TV pilots. And like many writers out there, I wasn't great about actually finishing them. I think a big part of that is relatable to a lot of people. So much of what I was writing, I could just never fund on my own. I was working at a grocery store in Central Florida and trying to picture any possible circumstance where a Hollywood studio in an industry I had zero connections to would spend millions of dollars to put one of my scripts into production. And I just couldn't envision that at all. Even funding a micro-budget feature seems wildly out of reach, and most of what I was writing wouldn't work on that scale anyway. It was really discouraging, and I often found myself giving up before I'd really accomplished anything. It was actually the same year the channel started, 2017, when I began to think a lot more about comics, thanks to a great college class. That's not to say I wasn't a reader before, I definitely was. While I grew up in a town in Montana without a comic book store, I read everything I could get my hands on at the library. Mostly older Spider-Man, Batman, and Superman runs, along with The Last Man and 100 Bullets. I kept that up for years, but while I never totally walked away from comics as an adult, I will say that from like 2013 to 2016, I wasn't exactly prioritizing them. I had just moved and money was really tight. But that university course on comics and graphic novels really gave me a renewed appreciation of everything that's possible in this medium. Soon I was reading stuff like Gilbert Hernandez's Julio's Day, which is just incredibly moving, haunting, and helped me realize just how much comics have to offer outside of its biggest publishers' heroes or TV and movie tie-ins. I read the Scott McCloud classic Understanding Comics and one of its essential follow-ups, Making Comics, which I would recommend to anyone who is thinking about writing a comic book script but isn't sure if they really have a handle on how the medium works quite yet. From then on, I was hooked. Brian Michael Bendis' Words for Pictures, Alan Moore's Writing for Comics, anything about comic book writing or the history of comics, I was all over. So then I immediately sat down and wrote Binary C, right? Well, not exactly. That was also around the time the channel was getting some traction, and keeping up with both a full college course load and weekly videos was honestly pretty tough. My own fiction really went on the back burner for a while. Then 2020 happened, and I mean, you all were there, you know what it was like. During those early months, I found myself rewatching a lot of old Star Trek. And look, just stick with me for a second, I swear there's a point here. Anyway, I noticed that Trek creator Gene Roddenberry had told both William Shatner and Patrick Stewart to read the old Horatio Hornblower novels, telling them, decades apart, that the key to both Captain Kirk and Captain Picard was in these books. So, on a whim, and because it was lockdown, and really what else was I gonna do, I ended up reading a bunch of them, and I found Hornblower to be a really high-strung, brave, but also very neurotic character, who, to be honest, didn't remind me that much of the Trek captains, though I can definitely see strands of him in Stewart's Picard. I couldn't stop thinking about those books, and ended up really submersing myself in old British naval stories that year, from The Terror to Master and Commander and Mutiny on the Bounty. And it's really at the crossroads of those, Star Trek, and pulpier pirate stories where Binary C was born. I wanted to reflect the things I loved in those stories, while hopefully bringing something fresh and exciting to the table as well. I'm really happy with the issue, but I'll let you be the judge of how well I was ultimately able to pull that off. As early as March 2021, I was writing down characters and concepts, dipping my toes in the water. And finally that summer, I sat down to write it. Comic book scripts are less standardized in format than TV or film, but I still wanted to make sure it wouldn't look amateurish to a potential artist, so I downloaded a few comic book scripts online and looked at the ones in Bendis's helpful book to give me kind of a baseline formatting style. I had had a lot of trouble completing screenplays in the past, so I made a promise to myself to finish at least one page a day of Binary C. But honestly, because I knew getting this thing out into the world was actually possible, the drive to finish it came a lot easier. With comics, it didn't feel like a far-fetched dream, it felt like something I could actually see through to the end. Which isn't to say it was extremely cheap or easy. I set aside money from the channel for a while to make sure I could actually afford to pay an artist and a colorist. But once that was in place and the script was in a state I was happy with, I decided to reach out to artist Jason Piperberg. I had read an interview with Jason online a few months before and had been really impressed with his art. I think it was this 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea piece that really sealed the deal for me. I reached out to him on Twitter, we spent some time hashing out a contract, and then we got to work. He really liked the script, though he did point out some rookie mistakes in there, like the fact that in a few places I tried to stuff way too many panels on the page. After a light rewrite, Jason was really able to get into it, so I'll step aside and let him take this part.
Hi, I'm Jason Piperberg. I'm the penciler, inker, and letterer of Binary C. Basically, I take Graham's script and I use that as a map for each page to create the black and white artwork, word balloons, and sound effects. I then hand those black and white pages over to Luca Romano, who brings them to life with his colors. But how do I get from the script to an inked and lettered page? Well, prior to any work on the pages themselves, I start by doing character designs for every main character in the book, as well as environment designs and sometimes even floor plans for important locations. It's a lot of prep, but it makes things go a lot smoother in the long run. Think of it like doing casting and location scouting for a movie. After all that concept art is finished, every page I do starts as a rough thumbnail sketch. This is where I look at the script and I figure out what I want each of the pages to look like when they're done. I do my best to make the pages readable at this stage because I figure if it reads well as a rough, it'll probably read well when it's done. Next, I do my lettering. In a traditional comic book pipeline, lettering is often done last, but I like doing it before any of the artwork is finished. That way, I always have enough room for the balloons and I'm not forced to cover up anything important in the artwork. Once that's done, I move on to the pencils, or the tight sketch stage. This is where I solidify details like the character acting, anatomy, facial expressions, pose gestures, etc. And after that, it's on to the inks. And no, inking is not just tracing. It's where things like lighting, clothing details, and textures are finalized, as well as, honestly, the look of every line on the page. So there it is. That's a quick look at my process for creating a comic book page. If you have any questions about making comics or my process, leave them down in the comments and I'll try to answer as many as I can. And now, back to Graham.
I think everyone brought their A game, and I can't wait for you to read it. I'm really hesitant to talk at length about my thought process behind these characters in this story before it's actually out there in the world. I tried a few times to talk like plot and character in this video, but I kept taking it out because at the end of the day, I want the comic to speak for itself. I will say I just loved this process. Getting on calls with Jason, talking about character designs and story mechanics, it was just so much fun. Writing is a pretty lonely pursuit a lot of the time, and being able to collaborate with others to bring something to life together is an experience that I won't forget anytime soon. And as much as I love Spider-Man and company, there's so much more to this medium than superhero stories owned by giant corporations. There's still endless possibilities to be found here, and that continues to excite me every day. So yeah, that was the background on Binary C Issue 1. You can find the link to the campaign below, and I'll be back talking about Invincible very soon.
Here's a special tip for the fellows and girls.
The regulation of His Majesty's Royal Navy. Article 1. None shall presume to quarrel with or strike his superior officer. The pain of such punishment shall be that the captain...
To have not only barrels of fun, but loads of free gifts and prizes too.